Hello there, and what a joy to be with you here on Sages on the JoyNews channel. If you're talking about water, sanitation and hygiene across not just Ghana but Africa, there's certainly one name that you cannot leave out in terms of those who are forebears and have made their significant contributions to making Africa, Ghana and the entire world hygienic or clean, if you want to call it as such. And they are doing that through their ingenuity. One name stands tall, and that's Professor Albert Wright, who needs no introduction because he's been celebrated across the world for his numerous interventions when it comes to academia in the field of engineering, and how he's been shaping the world of development towards the wash space. And I'm talking about water, sanitation and hygiene. But what motivated him to start this career, and how is it that a man from Ghana is now helping the world transform and, by some extension, meet the world's sustainable development goals, the SDGs? Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Professor Albert Wright. Hello, sir, and greetings to you, Kwaba, to the program.
Thank you very much.
I'm interested in your journey, first of all, and just wondering what is inspiring you, your inspiration. How did the journey start? And first of all, what inspired this whole engineering career for you?
Well, it was external forces that led me to engineering. My original idea was not very clear. So when I was in the sixth form, I took subjects like zoology, botany, physics, and chemistry. And suddenly, one of my masters at Mfansum, where I had my secondary education, called V.C. Datson, approached me and asked me what I wanted to do in the finals. And I told him that I wanted to do long jump and high jump, because we were about to have sports, inter-house sports, and those were the two events that I had qualified for. And he told me that wasn't what he had in mind. He was thinking of Legon, university work. And I confessed that I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And he told me that, his colleague, our physics master, told him that I had an approach to answering physics questions, which that master, developed only in his final year at the university. So he thought if I did physics, I would do well. He was going to recommend that. And I told him it was impossible because to do physics, you needed mathematics. And I wasn't doing mathematics at that time. And he assured me that if I would spend the vacation period between the second and third terms, he would help me to catch up. If I would spend them in Cape Coast, then he would help me to catch up with what he had taught during the past two terms.
When you said external factors, I thought those external factors were way from somewhere else, from outside the continent. I didn't know it was that close to you.
Very close to me, indeed. Yes.
Yeah, indeed. But your record is so stunning. I'm taking a look at the extent of work you've done in water and sanitation development, and I must say that I'm impressed about what you've done over the years. You've been all across Africa, doing a lot more in that space. Tell me about some of the impactful projects that you've carried out across the continent for the benefit of those who've not read like myself and have, the immense opportunity of just having a sense of how much work you've put in across the continent.
It all started when the African Development Bank convened a meeting in Abidjan. And at that meeting, it was decided that we should have an Africa Water Task Force to promote understanding and to promote sustainable development of our water. Earlier, I had chaired a committee to prepare a vision for Africa on water as our contribution to the World Water Vision that was then being prepared. And I presented the results of that endeavor at a meeting in Holland in the year 2000. So in 2001, we had this meeting and an African Water Task Force was established, and I was asked to become the chairman. And it was this that spurred my efforts in Africa about water in different parts in different countries.
Impressive. And speaking of the African Development Bank, not to digress though, just a couple of months ago, was part of that annual meeting of the African Development Bank. Nowhere did they talk about an African Water Task Force. Does it bring back memories? And are you a bit downhearted that the multilateral body is not keeping up in terms of funding and pushing more funds into water and sanitation?
Well, it's all a question of how they view their priorities. But we know that without water and sanitation, economic development is virtually impossible to achieve, because you need water for various purposes. In Ghana, we use our water resources for power generation. It is used in industries, and those who work need to be healthy. And so good sanitation is also important. So water is the first thing. And in the Africa Water Task Force, we were charged with actually doing things that would help to implement the Africa Water Vision 2025.
Wow. We are in 2025, and we'll be speaking a bit more about that vision shortly. But let's talk about, the story behind KVIP. We all hear the expression, but little do we know that you were part of the whole idea, and you have a backstory to that. I'm interested in hearing that story, at least for the very first time, because not many literature is replete with the kind of details and contributions you all made towards bringing up this whole idea of the Kumasi VIP latrine. Tell me that fascinating story about it.
It all started after I had served as a Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. And, at that time, too, I was a member of the WHO's advisory panel on environmental health, and I used to attend their meeting. In fact, I was a member from 1962 for 20 years. So 22 years, actually. So after one of the meetings, I felt so emotionally exhausted, I went to London to rest. And the day before I left, after going back to my hotel for following a little outing, I saw a message for me to collect somebody in Canada. And he persuaded me to extend my stay there, had dinner with me. And it turned out that he was working for the IDRC, International Development Research Center. And he asked me about my research interests, and I told him my research interests at that time were two. One was rural sanitation, rural latrines in particular, and water from wells around the university, where we sometimes found discoloration, and I wanted to do something about these two. And he said he would finance the sanitation part, the latrine part, provided I could get counterpart funding from Ghana government. And so this is how it all started. I went back to Ghana and prepared a proposal for him. He came and worked with me to finalize it, and he agreed to finance it. Fortunately, I had worked in the Ministry of Health, so I had contacts there. So I went back to Ministry of Health. They took me to Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Finance agreed to provide the counterpart funds through the Ministry of Health. And so I had a lot of money, foreign money and Ghanaian cedis for this project. And that's how it all started around 1966, 1967.
And the name KVIP?
The KVIP, the original name I gave to what we did was VIP, Ventilated Improved Pit Latrine.
Right.
And I saw that the name attracted a lot of attention. And later on, people were applying it to other types of latrines, which were not the same as my design. And so I decided to add K to it so that it became the Kumasi VIP latrine. So hence KVIP. Okay. It is ventilated, improved. Ventilated because the pit has a vent pipe, which is screened. And when wind blows on top, across this pipe, it sucks air, and with it, all the scent in the latrine. So the KVIP was odorless. It was also free of house flies, And so it was something decent to use, and people seem to like it.
Yeah,
Both
I
in
agree.
Ghana and outside.
And giving the moment we had found ourselves at the time as a country, that was a significant intervention in terms of the wash space. But are you then surprised at what's still happening? The fact that open defecation is still prevalent in our country today. I was working on one story related to the OT region, the cholera cases that we learnt of recently, and it will surprise you to know that almost everywhere within that community has become a spot for open defecation. That's how bad the situation is, not just in that part of the country, I mean, but in some other parts as well. So is it something that saddens you, the fact that as of 2025, despite the efforts you all made, we're still battling open defecation?
It saddens me, but it's not surprising to me, because when I'm in Ghana and I needed to use a toilet facility, which I call a response to a physiological imperative, I go to a hotel nearby for this purpose. But other Ghanaians may not have access to nearby hotels. So the point I'm making is that they have no other way to ease themselves. And I think we need to promote and require building codes should include that every house must have a latrine. And then in public too, there should be a way in which you provide toilets for people. In Britain, I think they have special toilets. Here in America, where I am, usually petrol stations all have small latrines there, about toilets, about one or two, and you can use them, some of them free. And I suggested that they should do the same in Ghana. There are a lot of petrol stations in Ghana, and they could require that they provide some one or two toilets and people can use them and pay a small fee towards the maintenance. The other thing that could be done is what they do in India. In India, they have these public latrines, and they should be able to have public latrines, which are paid. In India, when they use water for ablution, so when you go to their public latrine, they give you water and some soap, and after you have finished with the ablution and you wash your hands, they give you a towel which you use. These are all things we can do. So we don't have them. That's why we see open defecation. So we must pay attention to this. And because as you implied earlier, when we have open defecation, you have flies becoming agents of transmitting diarrheal diseases from one person to another, and they can very easily kill children, diarrheal diseases.
Yeah. And generally, why do you feel there's that disinterest in that part, or that sector of our national development?
It is not something that attracts a lot of money to entrepreneurs.
Yes.
So this is something that should be done by local governments, supported by central government in Ghana. See, if there is no money in it, there's no incentive. If we want people to do that, we must give them incentive, maybe give them some, contribute something towards what they do. And then let me tell you what we did in Kumasi.
That's right.
Kumasi, what was happening was that the toilets and their maintenance were costing the Kumasi City Council a lot of money. And so we asked them, why don't you privatize them? And when you privatize them, the private owners should guarantee to give you, the council, a certain amount of money every month or every day, and they can charge any amount of money they want. And in fact, some of the people working at the city council resigned and became owners of such latrines. Some of them demolished what was there and built modern water closet toilets, and they were charging and they were making money. I do not know whether this is continuing, but you can make money from these things. There are people who can make money from these things. So we need just to be creative and create incentives for people to do what we need to do to create healthy environmental conditions in our country, because they are important for our socio-economic development.
Yeah, Prof, I want us now to talk about your life in academia. That's an area we ought to also pay attention to, because you've done some quite some impressive work in academia as well. But let's start off from KNUST, where you were. How did that actually shape your leadership role? And what fond memories do you first of all have about KNUST each time the name is mentioned?
I have a lot of fond memories of KNUST. First of all, your question was about how my experience there may have shaped my leadership role.
Yes.
What it did for me was a realization that different people had different strengths. So when you are leading them, you've got to start by identifying the strengths of your staff members or those you are leading. And the work you assign to them should take that into account. Also, I noticed that different people have different ideas of the value of time. Those who are very busy have a very high value of time. And I realized that if I needed something done very quickly or very urgently, I must assign them to the busiest staff members. And they would turn around and do the work very quickly for me too, because they don't want to waste time on my work, on what I've assigned to them. They want to get rid of it so they can continue with what they're busy like. So these are at least two of the things that that shaped my life there. But there were so many things that I did at, particularly when Bamfo Kwachi was vice chancellor and I was his pro vice chancellor. We introduced 2 or 3 different things which I believe are being used still in the university.
And yeah, we'll get into the other stories about your fond memories and some of the lessons you picked up. But what time frame were you at KNUST, and what kind of an institution would you say you left behind? And looking at what's happening now there.
Well, I joined the KNUST in March 1963. And Kwame Nkrumah University had only recently been made a university by our president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. And so everything was new. And so we were privileged to be involved in getting things started. So, for instance, I was able to introduce a course in civil engineering, which I call civil engineering design, some 40 years ago, and more than 40, and it's still ongoing. I was involved with Professor Bamfo Kwachi in introducing the semester system, which some staff, particularly those trained in Britain and elsewhere, were opposing. But we were able to get this through, and I was glad to see that other tertiary universities were also adopting. They came to study our record and started adopting it. You now have it in Legon, as I believe. We also noticed that students tended to strike during the second term, and this was part of the reason why we introduced semester system. The other thing I did was about criteria for promotion of people to higher levels, senior lecturer, associate professor, and full professor. And this was something to be done across the board. I was made chairman of a committee that was to work on this, and I was really baffled how I could find one set of criteria that could apply throughout the university. And in the end, I felt that it has to be linked to scholarship. And how would we measure the scholarship? We decided to measure it through the quality of the papers that the staff members produce. We started with the professors.
Yeah.
The papers they produce must be peer reviewed, and they must have a certain number. And then we reduced the number to 2 or so for senior lecturers, and for associate professors, we had something in between. But before that, we didn't have any set criteria. When R.P. Bafo became the first vice chancellor, he said the university must have professors and all that. So people were just named professors without going through any strict criteria. So these are some of the things that memories I have for the university.
I would want us to focus on some of the pressing national issues in which we could tap into your immense expertise. But just going a bit back to KNUST and looking at the time frame, because that was very instructive for me. I'm asking the question because you talked about 63. And so I'm doing the calculation, doing a 3 more year addition, and that would take us to 1966. What memories do you have then as to what the life was and the kind of reaction that was happening on campus? And personally, what reflections do you have over that period as well?
Well, you're talking about the 66 coup.
Yes.
Kwame Nkrumah was on his way to North Korea, I believe, and he had appointed a committee to travel to Bolga to inspect a new meat factory, which was going to produce corned beef and other types of meat for the country. So I was a member of that delegation to go to Bolga for this purpose. So I came up, or shall I say, down from Kumasi to Accra. We got an Air Force plane, which saluted Nkrumah's plane before he took off. Then we were taken to Tamale and drove to Bolga. And we returned about 3 days later. And a friend of mine was driving me to the airport to take the plane back to Kumasi. And on the way to the airport, we heard over the news that there had been a coup in Egypt. So we said that in Ghana, it's impossible to have a coup, only to arrive at the airport and to be arrested at gunpoint. And I didn't know what was happening. We were taken to a certain place, and someone told us that there had been a coup that day. We didn't know anything about it. We were detained for actually 4 hours before we were allowed to give our addresses and released. So it was a traumatic experience for us. Unfortunately for us, we were not mindful of our families we had left behind at Legon. At that time, I had stayed at Legon overnight. And we did not get back home till about fairly late, because we heard that Prof. Abraham had also been arrested. We went to his house to commiserate with his wife, only to find that he was not arrested, he was there. So we briefed him about what we had heard and all that. So this was the little experience I had with it.
And just to chip this in a bit, I guess the records are pointing out that the President Nkrumah at the time, or Dr. Kwame Nkrumah at the time, was moving to Hanoi instead.
Hanoi.
Yes, in Vietnam, I understand.
Okay.
But the bigger focus is about, and the reason why I was asking the question is about what that did to Ghana's academia or education sector or curriculum, if I may say, because this is a burdening, University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, and many were hoping that it will become the black star once again of Africa, leading in technology and innovation. Do you feel there was any impact ever since that coup and changed the whole plan of what was supposed to be an institution that would churn out engineers like you?
Well, I do not think that it had that much impact, because he had appointed R.P. Bafo and others to lay the foundation. And so as far as the academic work at the university was concerned, it did not affect it that much. So this is what I would say about the academic part. So it didn't really affect it. It just affected movement out of Kumasi to other places. For instance, I was delayed in Accra for a long time before I could go back to Kumasi because of the stoppages on the way and all that. But academically, I don't think it really did affect, because Kwame Nkrumah had laid the requirements for the university, and R.P. Bafo had done what he needed to do to train staff. When I joined in 63, for instance, in engineering, civil engineering, there was no other Ghanaian there. But before very long, those that R.P. Bafo had sent abroad started returning. So things started moving fairly well. The name of the university was changed, but it was changed back to Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology later on. So I don't think it really affected
Probably there's a need for me to be a bit more direct on that question as to why Ghana is not producing much more engineers or people who are moving much more into the fields like you did in the past. You know, the question keeps coming up as to why the country is not being transformed by all these newbies in terms of engineers that we have and technical people that we're churning out from our universities.
When I was at the university, the population of engineering students was less than 500. Now it's in the thousands. So it's growing. So if you don't see the Ghanaians working in areas where engineering skills are required, it means that they have been trained, the Ghana government has invested in them, but after completing their courses, they may be working outside Ghana. I noticed that this applied not only to engineers, but also to doctors and all that. And we sent some of our students abroad to train and come back and to teach. And some of them never came back. You see, so why was that happening? Because probably there was no incentives. There were no incentives for them to work there.
Yeah, and it's still the case, isn't it? Because if you look at, and I believe, giving your background, you're somewhere in San Francisco, and the Silicon Valley has opportunities for many people who are being recruited, paid more, giving more money. We don't do the same for engineers or creatives in Ghana, do we?
One of the problems is that in a country like America, the population is such that when you produce something, you have innovation and you create something and you produce something for sale, you can produce it in large quantities. So the price a unit price comes down when you produce them in such large quantities. And even if the profit margin is very low, because the demand is high, those who are willing to pay for it, maybe you have a large number. It means even with small margins, you make a lot of money. When you are in Ghana with a small population, that doesn't happen. So your products are expensive and they cannot compete outside. The way out is for Africa to come together so that we have an Africa market, at least. Then we can produce things at lower cost because we produce them en masse, and unit costs and unit prices can come down, and we can make large profits by selling to many people. So this is it.
Yeah.
We don't have the markets. The market in Ghana by itself is inadequate.
Yeah.
You know, we are surrounded by Francophone countries, and in my time, even the French would not allow coordination between academic staff in Ghana and Burkina Faso or Cote d'Ivoire. So this is the thing. We need proper unity and a bigger market. Come together as a continent. Then we will have a market for development.
Africa's integration ought to happen and happen fast, as you're saying. We'll get your thoughts on some continental issues shortly. But let's start from the country Ghana. And you've been listening to the news, I believe, and hearing reports of some of the key existential threats and issues happening in the country. The biggest one is illegal mining, Galamsey. I'm not sure it's starting in 2025. I believe back in the 60s when you were in Ghana as well, at least some conversation was happening around illegal mining, isn't it?
That is the case, but it was at a very small scale. But from what I'm hearing now, the scale is now totally different. The problem is how the gold is being exploited. We are not exploiting it in a way that is environmentally sound. So there are all sorts of ways in which we must address this.
Could science bail us out as a country on this?
Yes, but it's not. It's a multifaceted issue. So you need an approach from different disciplines. Science and technology can help. How? You see, they should look at the methods that are being used now for the galamsey and give incentives for people at the universities to develop sound, simple approaches, village level operated technologies, which they can use to mine these things in a safe way. And then they should be regularized. They should, so that only licensed people are used for this. And the method of control should be worked out such that there's local control and all that. There must also be education of those who are involved, because from what I have heard, there's so much pollution, but they themselves too may be suffering from the consequences of the pollution. So they may be killing themselves unknowingly. You see, so there's all sorts of things need to be done. But for engineers and scientists, they can help by developing technologically sound, simple methods that can be used at village level. That's what I believe. And this has been going on and growing in intensity. Why? Because those who do these things can get away without any punishment for doing so. Secondly, there must be a demand, people ready to buy what they produce. And there must be some other people helping them technically to do so. So it's a big socio-economic, technological problem that needs to be addressed.
You're watching The Sages here on the JoyNews channel. My guest, Professor Albert Wright. We'll be talking about a lot more issues. I was just speaking about the continent and Africa. We know that your cohort, in fact, started this whole Africa Water Vision for 2025. We'll look at the lifespan of that project and what you think about it. But we'll do that after this short break. Please stay with us. And what a conversation we've been having with Professor Albert Wright, who needs no introduction. He's done an amazing work in the water and sanitation as well as hygiene space across Africa. And quite a conversation we've been having, Professor Wright, on, first of all, the history, the time at KNUST, and ultimately talking about what's happening in the country now, illegal mining, which you believe is a socio-economic and technology a situation happening to us. But I want us to scale up and to talk about what's happening across the continent, Africa. Water in itself, and in fact, we can connect that to illegal mining, is under threat, no doubt about that, especially because in our parts of the world, and talk about Ghana, and not just Ghana, but West Africa, where illegal mining continues, our water bodies are being threatened. This was not what you envisioned when you were, coming up with this whole idea of the Africa Water Vision for 2025, is it?
Not at all. Our basic problem in Africa was how Africa was divided by the colonial masters into different countries. And as a result, some of our major rivers pass through many countries, or the waters in the rivers are contributed by more than one country. In Ghana, for instance, the Volta Basin it drains an area which covers 6 countries. If you take the Nile, it passes through and drains an area which covers 10 countries, 9 or 10 countries. And the same applies to the Niger, which starts from Guinea and ends up in Nigeria. It also passes through about 8 or 9 to 10 countries. So you have these transboundary water problems. When we did Volta Dam, for instance, Burkina Faso was not independent. So we didn't consult them, and we did what we did. Now, when they became independent, they wanted a loan from the World Bank to construct their own dams and hydro schemes and all that. So we got involved, the Ghana government got involved, and the World Bank said that, well, before they give them money, they must come to certain agreements as to how the water should be shared. So it is this sharing which is a problem introduced by colonial division of our continent into the different countries. So that is a starting point. And when you have this type of situation, then you can get all sorts of problems. Some upper countries which are upstream of others can take more than they should take, thereby depriving downstream countries from getting what they need for what they want to do. Or they can pollute them. They also say there must be international agreements. These are some of the things that we wanted to address in the Africa Water Vision.
And you are pointing to, one of the significant players in world development, economic financing, or official development assistance. That's the World Bank. They've done so much across Africa. But what kind of influence would you say they've brought to bear on countries such as Ghana and the others when it comes to issues relating to water, sanitation, and hygiene? Has it been a positive one, or you believe there's more that individual countries ought to do by themselves?
The World Bank, the African Development Bank, these two banks have played significant roles in helping African countries to develop their water resources properly. For instance, one of the things that the African Development Bank did after the Africa Water Vision 2025 was to establish what was called the Africa Water Facility. And this was intended to strengthen the skills of African manpower to be able to borrow money both from the African Development Bank and from the World Bank, to know how to prepare requests, projects for financing, how to implement the projects once financing has been approved and all that. These were some of the things that the two banks, African Development Bank and the World Bank, have been doing to help. So they have not sat down. In fact, sometimes they take the initiative themselves to point out these are the things that you need. And they have meetings with governments, and as a result of these, financing is provided. But because of the problem I told you about the transboundary nature of our water resources, before a country can be given a loan by either of these two banks, then there has to be an agreement with other countries who use the same or share the same watershed with any country that is interested. So I would say that their influence has been positive and not negative, rather positive.
And Prof, you were just giving yourself away that you've had something to do with some of these international organizations. So the journalist in me is just seeking to find out, what kind of a role did you play with some of these international organizations? How did that actually shape your perspective on all of these global issues relating to water and sanitation?
Well, I earlier mentioned the Africa Water Vision. I led the preparation, and the sponsors were the then OAU, African Economic Commission for Africa, and the African Development Bank. So there were these three organizations. And so they led the preparation of that. And I led the team of people from these institutions and from other parts of Africa. And it was, as I said, our contribution to the World Water Vision that was being prepared. The other areas where I had been involved was the Africa Water Task Force. We organized some projects and events. One of the first event we organized was the Accra Conference, which dealt with how Africa could operationalize the vision in Africa Water Vision 2025. And we were lucky to have at least two important dignitaries there. The then President Kufuor was present, and also the Prince Orange of the Netherlands was there. He came with his new bride to the conference, and it was a huge conference. About 200 people were there, and there was a lot which came out of that conference, Accra Conference. We were also, the Africa Water Task Force was also involved in organizing what we call the Water Dome in Johannesburg, which was a week-long thing. It was a series of exhibitions open to all those in the world who were involved in the water resources. So it gave people a bird's eye view of what was happening and what could be done. And Kofi Annan too was there to grace the occasion for us with his presence, and he gave a speech at the meeting.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds really, really great. As controversial as it may sound, you're not necessarily trained as an engineer to be making all the profits in the world, all the money in the world. At least you want to change the world and impact society, which you've done through a number of your interventions and innovative works. But I've got to ask you, what was the most rewarding part of your entire engineering career?
The most rewarding part is, there are two that I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
The rural side, I've been to places where people will spend a whole day fetching a bucket of water. And when you introduce water hand pumps in wells so that they can get access to water, you see the smiles, the joy that they express when they have these water pumps, new water pumps, or new KVIP latrines. Incidentally, well, in Tanzania, they didn't want the name KVIP, Kumasi, so we just called it VIP for them. But when they realized these new things, they were so happy. The other thing is, my joy is in seeing my students excel in what they do, both in Kumasi and in other places. One of my first batch of students became a professor, and one of the buildings there is named after him, or halls is named after him, Professor Kumaple. There's another one who has developed something which has been used in Britain and France, I believe, for mitigating flooding in cities. And a number of them, some of them have been to the World Bank and they have excelled. So when I see such development, I'm very happy. My students doing very well. The other joy I have is about the first female I appointed to work in my department, Professor, who is now Professor Ese, where she just graduated. He had just graduated from biology, and I used her as I hired her to help to do the biological studies we needed to do in connection with the development of the KVIP. And when I see how far she's developed, she even became, she had a biological background, but through her interaction in our department, she at one time became Dean of Engineering and also Vice Chancellor of a new university in Sunyani. So these are, I believe she's going to be an ambassador, one of our new ambassadors under the new government. So
wow.
It's a bunch of joy when I see people like that do very well. And then some of my students elsewhere.
Any of them in politics yet, aside the incoming ambassador?
No, not really. The engineers don't tend to get involved in politics.
You keep shying away from politics. Probably that's why we're having so many challenges on our hands.
We had one engineer who became a vice president, Professor Joe DeGraff Johnson, with the Liman government at that time. But apart from that, you don't get many engineers getting involved in politics. But engineers do well in economics and things like that. And in the World Bank, a number of engineers who have risen to high levels. Yes.
I see.
You don't find them in politics.
No wonder you're not in politics, Prof. But you've contributed so immensely to the development of the continent and the country. Let's talk about some more memories, for instance, that you had along the line. You may have moved into some parts of Africa or across, and you have some good memories, isn't it, about your time, the time you spent elsewhere aside Ghana?
Yes, in Ghana, to start with, one of the first things I did at that time, I didn't think it was that significant, but I was involved with WHO officials in establishing the then Ghana Water and Sewerage Corporation, and the first I was one of the first members of their board of directors, and I'm very close to the then director of the corporation, C.K. Anna.
Right.
And through this interaction, I realized that Ghana was importing sand from Britain for its water filters at the water treatment plants. And you need large quantities of sand for this purpose. And it puzzled me. So one of the things I did at the university was to get one of my students to do a comparative study between imported sand and local sand. And we found no practical difference. So from that time onwards, Ghana switched from importing sand to using local sand at its water treatment plants. And yes, so this is one of the things that we did there.
Yeah. So since you're bringing up this issue about water processing, it's a controversial subject. I was speaking to the CEO of the Ghana Water Company Limited, no, the former one, and he says, and I mean, he's warning just off this whole Galamsey illegal mining conversation that at some point we may be forced to import water if this is not dealt with. Do you feel that's imminent, or it's just a point we keep throwing around, and that we've been blessed with quite a vast resource in terms of water bodies that we may not even get to that point of importing water?
This is one of my major fears. I read a recent article by somebody from Ashesi University saying goodbye to the Ayensu River, which he was saying had died. And he listed other rivers that had died. You see, and I shuddered to read that, because I could imagine that before very long, we could get to a point where we could no longer rely on our surface water bodies for drinking water, for industrial uses and things of that nature. And we cannot, when we import water from in bottles, they're mainly for drinking. But we may be forced before then, or we should start thinking about possibility of relying more and more on rainwater, as they do in some island countries like Bermuda, you see, where they have both surface, above ground facilities for rainwater harvesting or collection, and underground systems also. If our drinking water becomes so polluted, then the safest water to use for drinking and cooking and other bathing hygienic purposes in the house would be rainwater. So we may be forced to go to that. I hope we never get that far. But if to avoid that, we need to get our scientists working fast to do studies on what is causing the brownish water that we see. Is it just soil which has been carried by water into the rivers? Or does it contain some chemicals?
Right.
There must be studies on this.
Yeah.
And they must know also the trend. How has the intensity of pollution been increasing with time? When we have this trend, then we can predict where they're going to reach, how soon we can reach the point of disastrous consequences for the country.
Yeah. The prayer is that we never get there, and I hope that prospective engineers will also be looking into that and researching a bit more into that area. But speaking about prospective, engineers, there are so many who look up to you. I'm sure many have cited your works in academia. What advice do you have for them in terms of how to grow, how to be an impactful engineer, just as you are?
My advice is to have an open mind, to study hard, focus on basic principles, focus on the work of engineering, the part that you love, focus on a few rather than spreading yourself thinly on many things, and also focus on the work rather than on money. When you are a successful engineer, you'll be chased by money, and you don't have to chase money. So the initial thing should be focusing.
Yeah.
If you spread yourself too thinly, you can't achieve much. If you look around other areas, you find that those who have achieved much tended to focus on narrow areas.
Right.
Then you can go deep, not spread wide.
Wow.
Yes, so it's very, very important to do that. Also, they must value research, and at Kwame Nkrumah University now, they're doing a lot on training postgraduate students. They are a very good source of people, fresh minds. If you look at creativity, the people who have invented things, most of them did so between ages of 20 to 30. So you must tap their minds while they are still young through the research work that they do. Professors and all that learn how to prepare projects, proposals for funding. They should do more and more of that, getting local sources of money as well as foreign sources of money for their research. So that's what I'll advise.
Yeah,
focus on principles.
Yeah, and Prof, you seem to me like someone who's still actively working. Do you ever find time to rest or to have some fun at least?
Well, there was a time when I used to travel a lot for various purposes.
Yeah.
First, I limited myself to work I could do from home, but now I don't do any of those consulting. My current work is mainly on church work. That is what I've been focusing on. But even that, I have started handing over to other people, the young, fertile minds to take over. You see, so in my Bible class, for instance, I've been using a whole host of other people to lead the class, and they are in a position to take over in a very short time.
And I'd love to see that one day. Of course, when we join your Bible class, it will be as insightful and impactful as what you've done in engineering as well. But it shows how passionate you are, not just about education, but also religion. Beyond that, are there some initiatives that you're still carrying on? And as you pass on the baton, what would you want to be remembered for?
Well, one of my mentors was called John Briscoe. He said that I was one of a few people who act as servants of the people they serve. And I feel that in reality, my attitude has been to serve. Wherever I've been, it's been to serve the country, to serve the poor, to serve people through the church. So I'd like to be remembered as somebody who is a servant to his neighbors, And I'm using neighbors in the sense that Christ uses it in the parable of the Good Samaritan, where more or less from that parable you infer that a neighbor is somebody in need whom you are in a position to help. So I'd like to be remembered as somebody who serves people like that, somebody in need whom I'm in a position to help.
And just as we say to every teacher, every academic, your reward is in heaven. But of course, we're starting from here at JoyNews as well. And we're so grateful, Professor Wright, for spending some time with us.
Thank you so much. It's a joy and a pleasure to be with you.
Indeed, grateful. And we hope to reconnect again. But yes, so you now know the extent to which he's impacted many lives and, of course, contributed to changing Africa's wash space. Professor Albert Wright, my guest here on Sages on the JoyNews channel. When you see us next, of course, we'll bring you another personality that you've heard so much about, and we'll be learning a bit more about them, just as we've done today about Professor Wright. Thank you, Professor Wright, for spending time with us. And that's all we have for you in this package of Sages. We'll see you again. Bye for now.